Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very, very special guest here for the show today. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
Sure. Thank you for having me on, Kimberly. I really appreciate it. My name's Dave Holmes, and I write under the pen name of Old Harry Jesus. I live in Sebastopol, California, which is up in Sonoma County, about a mile or an hour north of San Francisco. So that's where I'm joining you from today.
Great. Can we go ahead and talk about your past leading up into your future? I mean, your present. Sorry.
Absolutely, absolutely. So anyway, I wrote a book recently, and I'll give you the kind of called Zen and the Art of Anal Bleaching. It's a novel, not a how-to, and I'll talk to you kind of about a little bit about where I started and how that eventually came to be. I was originally, Kimberly. I was a psych major when I was in school, and so of course I'm studying different psychological models of the mind and the ego and all that stuff and how it works. And the models didn't necessarily seem all that complete in a lot of ways, but anyway, it was interesting, right? Because I could apply it to myself and try to get some self understanding. And then my senior year. I needed, another course in the psychology major, and there's a course called Limits of Consciousness, and it was taught by a Dr. Gordon Becker at the time. And I thought, well, that sounds really interesting. Maybe I ought to take that. Well, it ends up I take this course, and the guy teaching it is a Zen priest, in addition to having his PhD in psychology and everything else, and that's why he's on the staff. And it was a fascinating course because it all had to do with just our conscious perception of reality and what our thoughts are doing and the stories that they're justifying and the attachment that we get to those stories and our beliefs and how that causes us suffering and angst in a lot of ways when those beliefs are challenged or our identity is challenged or we're attached to something we don't have. So that really got me interested in studying Eastern philosophy and psychology, right? And Eastern or Buddhism is really a psychology more than anything else. It's about the mind and how it works. And so I really spent a lot of time.
Was the Dalai Lama one of those people who practiced that culture or religion?
Yeah, I think the Buddhism, yes, I would say to some degree, absolutely. He wasn't someone that I particularly study a lot. I had read a lot of the older things in texts and stuff like that, and then I got accepted into a graduate program in Eastern philosophy and religion, and so then I did some graduate work at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, and I'm busy working on that, but at the same time, I'd moved from Omaha, Nebraska, all the way out to San Francisco because I got accepted into this program. But then I'm trying to figure out how do I pay my rent? It's so expensive out here, and and then trying to come up with tuition money and all, and it just ended up not being a sustainable thing because I was having to commute to working 50 hours or so a week, and then trying to get back in time for class, and I realized that in studying it in a university setting, it was really kind of more of a didactic. What is the history of these traditions, whether it's Taoism or Buddhism or Hinduism, but it wasn't really as applicable to what our own particular journeys, right? It really restricted how you looked at and studied that, and I realized, what am I going to do with a PhD in Eastern philosophy anyway? I can teach, but I'm not going to be able to afford to live out here if I'm teaching in San Francisco, and very few universities even have Eastern philosophy departments. Or I could write. At the time, I'd never written anything, and so I decided, I'll just continue to study this on my own and read things from different teachers and all, and then continue to do the only thing people would pay me to do, which was working and managing teams of inside sales reps and all. And so I eventually started working in high tech because I knew somebody who happened to need somebody in that industry for a job, and I needed a job. And
what in high tech did you do?
So I worked in the sales department, but I wasn't a sales rep. Kimberly, I managed a team of people that supported the sales force. So we supported the systems that they use for forecasting and managing their pipeline, sales pipelines, and doing. We had teams that did order management, managed that aspect of it, the training of the sales reps. It was really that whole operational infrastructure that sits behind a sales force. So yeah, it was sales operations, and I did that at a number of companies. And ended up, next thing I knew, that was kind of my career. I spent 16 years in high tech, working down in Silicon Valley and living in San Francisco. And in that eventually really started to kind of take its toll because the hours are tremendous and it's a very reactionary industry. What's happening with the competitive landscape, it changes so fast, and the company's goals and priorities are shifting constantly, and you're whipsawing the people that work for you on your team, and they're having to put in tremendous hours. And at the end of the day, it's kind of like, wow, I'm working crazy hours. It's extremely stressful, and when I'm not at work, I'm not really mentally present with my wife and my kids because I'm thinking of 1,000 things that still had yet to be done that came up that day and all. And I thought, this isn't really an ideal environment to be really present and be mindful and be compassionate. It's really more of just a psychological day-to-day survival, unless you've got a lot of ego around attaining a certain VP or SVP role, or and there's a lot of people that do that because they love it or because they're trying to prove something to themselves. There's all sorts of different reasons, but I didn't feel I needed that for personal validation anymore. I realized I could do that. I could play in that space. I could be successful in that space. But what was I ultimately getting out of it with respect to how was I living my life relative to what I thought was a mindful, aware life versus basically helping to sell IT plumbing to Fortune 500 companies, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So about 10 years ago, we moved our family about an hour north of San Francisco up to Sebastopol, and more affordable, slower pace. And we had some property in San Francisco, and we sold. And I said, I'm just going to start working on investing that money in different real estate kind of projects. And so we started investing in apartment complexes. And
how many apartment complexes do you have?
Right now, I either have or I'm a limited partner in about 7 different complexes. There's been times where it's been more, times where it's been less. They're different sizes, anywhere from a 3 or 4 unit type of deal up to a 400 unit deal. But usually I'm a partner in that because it's a little bit bigger than I can go try to handle on my own. So I can kind of participate in it, but at a much smaller equity type of contribution, so to speak. But what it really provided me too is the time to be able to also get back into really, spending time practicing, being aware, studying non-dualism and Eastern philosophy, and really trying to work some of that into more of the fabric of how does I approach my day-to-day life, right? And it also gave me some more free time because there's times where it's busy, but there's times where it's slow. And I decided, well, shoot, a buddy of mine and I, years ago, were talking about the book, the classic Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and how everyone started coming out with other Zen and the Art books, Zen and the Art of Archery, Zen and the Art of Happiness, Zen and the Art of, whatever else. And we thought Zen and the Art of Anal Bleaching is an off the wall, absurd title. Wouldn't that be an absolutely hysterical name for a book? And my buddy said, yeah, we could call it Zen and the Art of Anal Bleaching, a backdoor journey from darkness to light. So we had this concept, but 5 years or so passed, and neither of us had really written anything, right? Because we weren't writers. We were just people that like Eastern philosophy, thinking of funny stuff. Well, Steve had a blog that was really successful, and he'd accumulated a lot of content on that blog over the years. And so he wrote a book that was not a fiction book, but he really cleverly wove together through a certain theme, a lot of this different content from his blogs. And he wrote a book called Spiritual Constipation: How to Shift moving. And so he was working on that book, and he published that. And excuse me, the dog. And he was working on getting that published and promoted. And I thought, you know what? If I don't start writing Zen and the Art of Anal Bleaching, it's just never going to be a book. And so there's a lot of different ways I could go with it. But I thought, you know what? So often we're studying psychology or self-help or, Eastern philosophy. This stuff is dry. It's hard to kind of relate it from, what they're talking about back into someone's life. And I thought, why can't this just be a lighthearted thing? Self-help and all that. Why can't we use humor to create a funny novel that someone's going through, having these funny experiences, but at the same time, can we weave in some Buddhist psychology into the fabric of the story, but not using terms like karma and dharma and dukkha and all this stuff that sounds kind of heavy, and just have this guy going through this journey of self-discovery and have all those kind of principles applying to what he's seeing and going through. But yet, even if you don't really want to take and reflect on your own personal journey, you can still enjoy a funny story, get exposed to maybe some new concepts, but in a way that's just enjoyable, and you can laugh the whole time, right? And so that's what I did and decided, okay, let's make this a novel, and ended up getting it published this last summer, and it's on Amazon now, and people are buying it, and so far it's gotten all 5-star reviews. It won an award. It won the silver medal in the 2024 Global Book Awards for the dark humor category.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. So it turned out to be a fun project, and I had never written any fiction before, so it was quite a learning experience along the way for me.
Okay, and what about the actual book, Old Harry Jesus?
Old Harry Jesus. Yeah. So
yes, tell me about that book in an excerpt. Let me hear an excerpt.
Well, Old Harry, the book title is Zen and the Art of Anal Bleaching, but it's by Old Harry Jesus. So that was the pen name that I wrote it under as the author, right?
Yeah, because your name, you said that something about you correlating with Old Harry Jesus. I think you are Old Harry Jesus.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty cool.
I am. That's like my email is oldharryjesus@gmail.com. my website is oldharryjesus.com. But there's a funny story behind that. So what I was telling you before, Kimberly, about when I left high tech, and I realized, I'd been at the same company for a while, and I always use my work email, and I thought I got to come up with a personal email, right? Because otherwise, people got to reach me and vice versa. And so I'm going through the process of creating a Gmail address, and as you can imagine, everything is taken. Dave Holmes is taken. Dave W. Holmes, David Whitaker. I'm trying everything, and they're suggesting, Dave Holmes 765382. I'm like, no one's going to remember that, So I start putting in different things, exasperated. Things are taken. Eventually, I just typed in Old Harry Jesus at gmail.com, and lo and behold, it was available. And I thought, all right, that's going to be my email. People will be easy for people to remember. So that becomes my email. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, I got friends calling me Old Harry Jesus or calling me OH. And next thing you know, it becomes a nickname. And so I thought, well, if I'm writing some audacious book, I might as well use an audacious pen name to write it under to make it even more funny and maybe catch someone's eye and they want to pick it up and take a look and see what it's all about. So that's the backstory there.
You've accomplished a lot. You have accomplished quite a bit. And can you tell me more about the business that you did where you were working 50-hour shifts? and you said you were stressed out. I want to lead the audience with something of how you detached yourself from that life and extended another life pattern.
Yeah, it definitely was a big shift, right? And one of the challenges too is, at least for us, and my wife works full time as well, but you're living somewhere expensive. Say you're the Bay Area, New York, Chicago, LA. You're living in a place where just to have a house and have that your kids have a bedroom and stuff in. I mean, you need a certain amount of income coming in, and when
Yes.
suddenly you wake up and decide, holy crap, I don't think I can continue doing what I'm doing, at least full time. I consulted and stuff like that and have been for a while, but in smaller doses, right? But I can't do this full time and feel like I've got a sense of purpose that makes sense to me. Well, what am I going to do? It's like, I can go, start from square one, but now how are we going to pay our bills and everything else, right? And so that becomes a real hard decision to make if you're in a scenario where you really kind of need the two incomes and that you have coming in from careers that you've spent time working on to continue your lifestyle, right? And so my wife and I, we spent time talking about it, and she's like, look, it doesn't make sense if you're miserable. I mean, ultimately that affects the family. If you're gone all the time. I traveled internationally for work, so I was gone 2-week chunks here and there in Asia and then Europe and all, and felt like I missed out on a lot of my kids' lives when they were really young. And I didn't want those trade-offs anymore, and that was a big part of it too, Kimberly. So we kind of figured out, well, look, let's move somewhere else where we know it's cheaper. We know the public schools are good because in San Francisco, unfortunately, they're not. And you have your kid in private schools, it's like another mortgage, right? A place both my wife and I went to public schools. I think there's a huge advantage of public schools anyway, just because I think kids need to be around kids from all different types of backgrounds. And
I agree.
Yeah, different socioeconomic statuses, different cultures, and all that. And some of that's good and some of it's not good, so to speak, but it gives them a better idea of what's the fabric of this country like. And there's a lot of diversity, and not growing up in kind of a bubble where everybody talks like you and their parents do the same thing and you live in the same size house and whatever. So we ended up finding a town of Sebastopol up here in the wine country. It's about 10,000 people. It's a smaller town. It's close to Santa Rosa. You're close to San Francisco. You can get to stuff, but it worked out numbers wise. So we didn't have as much financial pressure. And
can I ask you a quick question?
Please.
This is important too on your life journey, because I hear you keep saying your wife, your wife, your wife. How did you meet your wife, and how did you keep your wife?
Yeah. That's the big question, isn't it, Kimberly? It's like anyone can trick a woman into marrying them, but they trick her into staying with you for 25 plus years. Well, that's a whole different game, right? My wife and I met when about 30 years ago or so, and I was working as an inside sales rep at a company in San Francisco, and one of my coworkers on the team, who was a really fun person, and her name was Greta, and people would get together after work sometimes for drinks. Well, Greta's roommate would come every now and then, and that was Linda, who's now my wife. But at the time, we were in other relationships and stuff, so I knew who she was, but we didn't really start dating. And but I really always I thought this is a really neat, grounded, intelligent person, and Greta probably must have felt the same way, because she would, continually, even after Linda had moved and she was working in Salt Lake, and Greta and Tom had moved too, and Greta would kind of keep me up to date every now and then with what Linda was doing. I was like, oh, okay. Well, then Greta decides she's going to have a surprise birthday party for her husband, 30th birthday. And she invited me, and they were down in Mountain View an hour or so away. And I said, yeah, okay, I'll come down. And Linda had come out from Salt Lake to also go to this party, come to find out. And so Linda was there, and we just spent the whole night chatting, having a great time, getting to know each other. And the timing was perfect because I wasn't in a relationship. She wasn't in a relationship. And, of course, I lived in San Francisco. She lived in Salt Lake City. But it was both of us, I think, had been through enough previous relationships. We had a pretty good idea of really what is it that we were looking for in a compatible partner to go through the rest of life with, right? And so we started dating long distance, even though we'd done that in the past with other people and decided we weren't going to do that again. But I knew right away, I mean, I thought I don't mind the long distance thing because it could take me multiple lifetimes to ever find somebody that's that uniquely special to me in the ways that were important to me. And so, anyway, we ended up eventually getting into the same town and got married and then had a family together. But I think the second part of your question is, hey, how'd you hold on to her? and I think that it's interesting because relationships change, right? I mean, the people change in those relationships, and I know I have. I think I'm a very, very different person than I was when we first got married, and I think that, and my wife too. But I think for us, it was not being threatened if that other person changed and grew and had different interests or changed their outlooks or opinions or views. It wasn't like, oh, this is threatening to me in the relationship. It was like, how do I give that person the freedom to
grow
and be who they are blossoming into and developing into? And she's been, I mean, amazing with how open she's been to me and how I've changed and what I've chosen to do, or how priorities and values have shifted. And I think that has had a lot to do with the fact that we could continue to have a relationship, even though we're different people and the relationship shifts over time. It still can be new and fun and interesting and supportive, as long as people aren't feeling threatened by the change in the relationship, if that makes sense.
Well said. I wanted to ask you a question about wow. How do you feel when you're on this journey and you have tough times? Now, this isn't a relationship. This is you don't have to tell me how much you make or nothing, but I wanted to know, how have you maintained? Is the first year the hardest? And if you don't pass after the 5 year mark, do your business actually go down a drain?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think we know there's a lot of uncertainty at the beginning, and going from even something that's certain, even if we're not happy about it, we know what we can expect day to day, and there's a certain predictability that we want in life, right? For financially, for what do I go and do every day? How are things going to work out? And to walk away from predictability and what's known to go into an unknown where you're going to just see what happens is a pretty scary feeling. I mean, you're vulnerable at that point.
That's
And
like going into a black hole and not knowing where you're going to come out at, if you come out.
yeah, yeah, that's a good analogy. You're right. If you come out, right? I mean, so there's a little bit of hope baked into that equation. And so, for me, initially, it was funny because initially I thought, hey, I want to find opportunities to buy homes, like single family homes that are kind of broken down, and be able to fix them up and resell them. And add some value, and hopefully it's worth more than I put into it. And, I can make some money doing that. And so I spent probably 5 months, the first 5 or 6 months, I mean, constant open houses, meeting with contractors, trying to put business models together on what I think the cost would be, what the future value would be, and I couldn't make the numbers work because unless I was a contractor myself doing all the work, there wasn't enough margin there, and I'm not the handiest guy. Well, Linda would tell you I'm not really handy at all, so that was kind of a stretch. So that was kind of a bit crushing, because now I'm like, oh man, we moved up here and started this new life. I'm pretty far away from Silicon Valley, and my old kind of where I need to be career wise, and this isn't working out like I'd planned. And but I was determined to figure out a way and where there was opportunity. And I ended up taking a look at, well, what if some of that equity, instead of putting it into fixing up a home, I put it into buying, say, an apartment or a fourplex or a duplex or whatnot, and held on to that based upon the rental income coming in. If I could find the right amount of rental income, and those rents going up over time, could that still work out? And I ended up finding a couple that did. And I thought, well, this is good. And then one of them was actually a decent sized home that was being used, rented by someone who was running a sober living facility for people that
Oh,
were just
wow.
that were coming out of treatment and needed a place to stay. They couldn't just go right back into their old life. It would be too hard and all. And they needed to be with other people going through the same thing and an organized, supportive relationship. And so I started talking to the people that were running that and say, well, what are you looking for in houses for that? I mean, and do you need additional rooms and space? And they were like, yes, we keep turning people away because we don't have enough rooms, and beds in the house to do that. And so I started looking for homes that fit that criteria: the amount of bedrooms they had, the amount of bathrooms, were they close to public transportation. There was, kind of a list of a few things that needed to be there, and ended up finding two other ones and finding people to come in and run sober living facilities out of those. And so that worked pretty well. And then I started looking at, fourplexes and in certain, after a certain appreciation, I would maybe sell one and then reinvest that in something, with more potential and all. And so I found a path, and it was not a path I started on, but yet I wasn't too rigid for too long, because I started realizing the probabilities of the first path didn't seem to be making sense. Just I couldn't model it in a way, even on a spreadsheet, to make it work very well, unless I got some wild unicorn place for super cheap or something, right? That I could fix up.
Real quick, we're running out of time. So where do you see yourself going in the future?
Well, I think I think with the real estate thing, I'll continue to manage investments in that. I enjoy that, and it seems that I've got some good partners in some of the projects that are bigger projects. I'm a smaller stakeholder in, and I'll continue along that path. I think from a writing perspective, I'd definitely like to write another book, but yet I realized, Kimberly, it's a lot more work than I thought it was on the front end, right? And so I really want to make sure it's something that I can get excited about the book, about the plot, the characters, what the message might be within that. And so I'm not really rushing that, because I don't want to produce something just for the sake of producing it unless I'm passionate about it, because I know it's going to need hundreds of hours of work, and I want to be able to really feel confident that it's something that I'm super excited about creating.
Well said. And if you had to give an entrepreneur a piece of advice, which you have given so much advice, what would it be?
I think the advice that I would give an entrepreneur is, for sure, things are going to go in different directions than you anticipate. Things will happen that you didn't anticipate. Things will break that seem like they're moving in the right direction, and that there's always open doors. But you've got to stay curious. You've got to be aware. You've got to question things. You've got to constantly be a student and learning and finding people that are smarter or have more experience than you, and you'll see those open doors. If you are convinced you've got it all figured out, it's going to go a certain path, and you're bound and determined to drag it down that path, and you've got too many. I mean, it's good to be focused, but if you get so focused you've got blinders on, you could miss a lot of opportunities, and maybe there's something better than what you even originally conceived of that could manifest. So stay flexible and stay curious, and keep learning, and realize that the path is there. You just need to discover it, and you need to keep your eyes open in order to do that.
Okay, thank you, and well said, by the way. Thank you, everyone, for watching my show. You all take care, be safe, and I'll see you next time. Hold on, stay on the line, Mr. Holmes.
All right, Kimberly.